head, but weirdly I got to thinking about software engineering lectures I had in college. Years and years and years and years and years ago. And, well, quite. And whether it was all guff and nonsense, and whether it was applicable to making sites and Drupal and what we do. I got to thinking about it a bit and thought there are actually a lot of parallels between D7's capabilities and D8, entities, fields, and object-oriented programming, and it seemed to do a full circle back to the stuff that they talked about in software engineering 10 odd years ago. So, yeah, this talk is kind of like a proof of concept, as much as anything, and hopefully it might stimulate a bit of discussion or just stimulate some thought in your own heads. But I guess the idea is to do that bit more structured planning when starting a site build. Because we all love to go, there's the brief, great, throw that away, let's tuck in. Content types, great. And then you get 2/3 of the way down the project and you discover you've misinterpreted something and it all falls apart. And, then you end up with duplicate content types and fields you didn't need and new fields you've forgotten and all of this sort of crap. So, when your site, not necessarily for a brochure site with news and pages and you're done, but when you're building web applications, which is a lot of what we're doing this weather, you're trying to build or model business processes for companies and data structures for companies, and you're trying to take their brick and mortar business and turn it into something electronic. So, I saw these parallels, like object-oriented programming terms on the left and Drupal terms on the right, and you can see that they're, on the face of it, there appear to be a lot of parallels between them. The entity-specific behaviours to which I refer there, that would be like where you're doing some custom magic on, say, node view or something like that, or node save, or all of the various hooks that Drupal offers. So we've got entities and fields and properties, classes, all of that. We're linking them all together with entity references, and entity metadata wrappers offer us the opportunity to access data, change data, get and set. Again, very sort of object-oriented feeling to all of this. So, this is almost copied straight from my notes from college, the process of getting down through when a customer comes to you with a requirement, or rather a story that you need to try and distill into a requirement and bringing it down to actually building something. And all of this is going to be familiar to everybody because we've all dealt with clients and we've all had to try and ask all the hard questions. What is it you really want? Do you want a garage for your car, or do we need to supply the car to? So the interesting things I thought were noun and verb identification, which was a concept that I had never come across before. And it's like where you take some sort of requirement narrative, say tender document, or maybe it's after you've done a couple of iterations of discovery and research, and you're into user story territory. And you start to get a feel for what the data structure will actually look like. So I cobbled together a fictional request for a booking system for a hotel here. And it's intentionally vague because I figured that's probably more real life. So if you have a look-see, all the red ones are nouns, the green ones are verbs, and all of the nouns, they can pretty much be mapped onto classes and properties, and the verbs are more like methods. So all the nouns will describe the data, and the verbs are stuff that the user will want to be able to do. So there's obviously a load of guff in there as well, like Excelsior Hotels Limited. That doesn't count. So you need to prune down your noun list, get rid of duplicates. So the black ones, they're probably valid for classes or maybe properties. Ditto the verbs. So these are more the things that people want you to do. A visitor will need to be able to book a hotel room. Staff will need to be able to manage the system. You need to be able to make bookings or whatever, leave comments, attach documents. So you take your nouns and start actually putting together your data structure. Say we've got customer, which is a user entity. Give them some properties. Now, this diagram is not proper UML, because I haven't done that in a long time, but it should give you the idea. It shows you your entities, name your entity, a few properties, so that's your entity type and its fields. There's an entity reference. You can have one customer, or a customer can have many bookings. Here's another entity. Now I've said content types on here, but you could do custom entities. Who knows, if you're using commerce or something, maybe you're not going to have a user entity, you're going to have a customer entity. Let's just call them entities. You've got your room booking entity. Our room booking can have many entities attached, again, entity reference. And you can see how quickly you've got a data structure, a complex data structure that's fully understandable before you've even sat down in front of a computer to start actually putting stuff together. And say, check this out, and I'd be interested to get people's thoughts on this. Say you've got a room booking, right? You need a room. Users will be able to see, need to be able to see a room, right? And staff will need to be able to edit the room. So that is a reasonable candidate for a node. Now, beds and facilities attached to the room, likely to be taxonomy terms. Now, a facility might need a load of fields on it. You know, I've got a blank in there because I was doing this at 12 o'clock last night. But you could have a load of fields in there, a load of properties. Some of those could be candidates for other taxonomies, or they could be candidates for just drop-down lists and stuff. And I'm coming to the conclusion that drop-down lists of text values are evil and should be stamped out. So chains of taxonomy terms are actually the way to go, even though in terms of UML diagram it looks like a sprawling mess. So yeah, if anyone has any opinions on that, that'd be interesting. So yeah, that's the idea. Anyway, you got your class diagrams, and this is the other one that wouldn't fit on that first slide for making restaurant bookings. We've got our same customer content type, meal booking, quite similar. So the sort of UML diagram approach can be developed further. There's all sorts of diagrams that you can do. You know, have your users with their different roles, how they act upon your system, what sort of use case diagrams, to try and capture who needs to do what and how. And the idea is to just aid in getting the architecture down solid before anyone starts building anything, in case someone goes off left field and builds something that really isn't cricket or in scope. The idea would be that once you've once you've knocked out some of these, we can never do that. Once you've knocked out some of these, you can see the data structure. Everyone involved knows what links to what, how many items should be available per entity. I think it's likely to make certainly complex products or projects a lot more stable from the get-go. So that's the idea. Turns out it was really short and sweet. There we go.
Can I?
Yeah.
It's kind of the antithesis of anything agile.
Shit.
Because rather than doing just enough, you're back to upfront design. So you're back to saying, the terms that we used there, the words which were quite telling were, we've got the system designed and complete before we start work. And that's normally before you find out what people actually need.
But you find out what they need, you've at least got an MVP in mind. I mean, you have to start building towards something.
But that's not an MVP.
It might be.
No, that's everything. That's everything they ask for.
Well, he just said, have you though? So was that
so if you're going from their spec, that's the world. That's their end result. You've designed their end result. The only thing we know for sure that during a project life cycle is that their end result will change. What they want will change when they learn what they can have and when they start seeing what they've got. So we're designing for something that is never going to happen. So you're saying, at the start of the project, you've told us, this is what you want. You want this car, and you want this colour, and you want this many wheels, and you want this many wheels, and you want this cc of an engine, and you want this many cigarette lighters in it. Further down the line,
but why can't you accept that spec and draw a picture of the car and say, is this what you want? And they said, that looks like it. Let's start building.
But hang on.
And after 2 weeks, finish sprint 1, we go back to this is what we've built so far. Is this what you're expecting us to build when you showed us this for the steering wheel? No, it's not. Let's change it. It's easy to go back and change these diagrams then.
No, you're redoing it. You're redoing the diagrams.
Yeah, of course. It's agile.
But it's not just enough because you've done the whole design that you know you're going to have to redesign.
But it could depend on the fidelity of those diagrams. So in other words, the diagrams could be seen as an overall project vision that's subject to change, or you're literally going to go down to every single property and every single entity. That's not agile.
No.
However, a diagram like that could be drawn up within the space of half an hour going, this is generally where we're going for. That can be a tool that can be
used for using
to help basically explain the client's vision of the overall thing. Now, their overall vision almost inevitably, you're right, will not match what they really want and what will not be delivered at the end. But it can be
what they need.
Or what they need, correct. But it can be a useful tool in terms of starting a conversation. But when you get down to what options do we have a meal book and vegetarian?
Maybe Anthony should answer the question.
Who's the conversation for with this diagram? It's not for the client because the client doesn't know what you're talking about.
I just have a point to make. It's discovery. You're saying it's spec and it's upfront spec and that's the antithesis of agile. But I'd say that without it, you have no idea what you're dealing with. Instead, if you don't say this is a spec, this is what we're going to build. If you instead say this is discovery because what we're doing is we're modelling, then that's part of the discovery phase. It's not a spec which says how it should behave.
Okay.
The key, I think, is in the fidelity. I 100% agree with Mike. If you spend 6 weeks doing this to the nth degree in a project, especially if you do it internally and not with the client, that can be complete waste.
It's a recipe for design.
But if you do it, I think that could, even with clients, that diagram can be a useful tool to talk to people about, okay, here's how we see this fitting together. And maybe they don't understand UML diagrams, probably don't. But it can be
But before you get to that stage, you're going to be talking to the client about what they want anyway.
Well, yeah. Well, you couldn't do that without talking to them initially.
Yeah, exactly. So you have a good idea after talking to the client initially what they want, so you're going to give them a rough idea of what you think they want.
But I suppose to come full circle and to say what you've got generally is the antithesis, but what I would suggest you could try and do to make sure that you get the benefit of this is to do it for modules. So instead of having the whole class diagram, you make a booking and split it out and plan it out. But don't spend too much time with it. And then you've got that to refer to and that to use. But if you have the full UML diagram, and you can't do a full UML diagram in half an hour, so it's...
UML diagrams don't have to be complete, because Anthony's already said these are not complete ones, so you can know what the classes are without knowing what the properties or methods are.
So, but if you tease out a section, something that's going to be completed in this sprint, for example, or the following sprint, then yeah, because it's useful for everybody to be on the same page. So,
interesting how it goes on UML diagrams. We were asked to draw in a very recent project as part of the spec, draw a UML diagram of the existing system. Fact.
yes.
He said no, not in this phase. Won't be the next phase either.
I think this is relevant. It's just kind of a thing I'd heard. One of the developers in Dare Creative as an experiment, I think, but I think the idea is
Quit your job inside Enertech.
semantic, semantic kind of class naming. I don't know the details, but anyway, they brought in the client, and through talking with the client, they came up with a list of class names. And he said it worked really well as a way to kind of further the dialogue, where you've got your big paragraph as to what they want, and then break it down further, like you've done there. I don't know what the end result was, whether, I mean, it just ended up in a big mess anyway, but he said it was, he said as an exercise it was really good for the client to be able to kind of flesh out what they actually wanted, you know?
I think the idea of the verb and the noun identification is what we're talking about, and that's useful, because then people can start talking the same language.
I think obviously we're all sold on agile and iterative processes and such. Now, if, say, you were to look for your MVP, you cut out all that. There you go. But even just thinking in terms of, might we need to have taxonomies?
That's a very dangerous area to get into, because where do you stop?
Fair enough.
What if they want to make eggs with this in the future? What if they want to actually do something else that's completely related and never mentioned, but they might? It's the apocryphal story of the king asking somebody to design something to make his breakfast, and the designer comes up and gives him a toaster, and the techie comes up and gives him a toaster, but it's also got a bit on it that cooks eggs, and a bit on it that does bacon, and a bit on it that does that, because you just might want that for breakfast. Whereas breakfast is fine as toast. It's just enough. So yeah.
There's a lot of eggs in my house this morning.
I'll tell you what.
That's a great story. That's a great story, alright. He's doing the eggs.
They're the best eggs I've had today. Thank you.
That's it, so.
Thanks, Anthony. We weren't going to have open spaces for the past hour.